So it gives me the most picante, extra spicy pleasure ever to introduce my next guest, who really needs no introduction. And it's the wonderful Nick Jones, who's the founder of Soho House and Co.
That's right. Yes.
I always pause if there's going to be a re in it.
That's it.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thank
today.
you for having me, Mark.
Oh, it's really exciting, and no, there's been a few peak guests, and you get the nerves a little bit when you're doing it. So, in the last little while, we did Fatboy Slim, which was really super exciting, and you're just sitting going, "This guy knows the Beastie Boys," you know.
Well, he's a hero of mine, and he got married at Babington.
He did.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Well, when was that ago? 20 years ago, or something? Was that? Maybe
Longer.
more. Yeah. Fantastic. And do you remember that day? Were you there for it?
I was there. I was lucky enough to be invited.
Wow.
It was fabulous.
Yeah. I
He's
bet.
such a nice guy.
He's the nicest guy, and he does so much for the community in Brighton. So many DJ. He's played Soho Beach House.
Yeah, he's done all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he's fantastic. And you know, it was really weird during COVID. Like, he was serving you your cappuccino.
Yeah.
At the thing, you're like, oh my god. So yeah, no, big hero. So yeah, so thanks so much for doing this. And then obviously your twin has done this as well, Robin Hudson.
He's got much better hair than I have.
Than most of us.
But most of us, exactly.
Okay, well, I've just come off the back of, actually, I was saying to you, it's the first time I've been in London since November, just sort of taking a bit of time down in Brighton and enjoying it. And on the way up, I was listening to, you must know Brent Hoberman from lastminute.com.
Of course.
So Brent's my old boss. I used to work there when I was a kid, you know, and I was just listening to his words of wisdom on entrepreneurialism and things like that. So maybe a good place to start, actually.
Well, I mean, and also just on Brent, because I mean, you're recording this from 180 in the Strand, and Brent's offices are here at 180 in the Strand.
Are they?
Founders Forum are upstairs.
Is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there you go. You
fantastic.
might bump into him on the way down.
Yeah, well, that would be amazing. And he did such a fabulous podcast, and it is quite hard to hear, I guess, for people that are millennials and younger about what it takes to do this, you know, and be an entrepreneur. So he was talking about people that are entrepreneurs, so people that are obviously wanting to be, but he was saying you probably have to give up sort of 95% of your life to this, you know, and it's obviously going to be something that you really enjoy. So just starting there then, as an entrepreneur, what did you find, you know, from starting this out? You know, what advice would you give that type of thing?
Well, my advice would be go for it, because I love people, you know, younger people who have a dream, have an ambition, and believe in something. And lots of people come and speak to me and ask me my advice, and I always say, give it a go.
Yeah.
Because that's the moment where it's easy. I mean, I remember myself, I could have stayed with Trust House Forte. I was sort of progressing up their management sort of structure. It was safe. Every job was slightly bigger than the last job. And then I decided to pack it all in and go and work in sort of fast food restaurants, casual dining restaurants, to really get that experience before opening up on my own. And obviously I don't regret it.
Yeah. And which fast food restaurants did you go to then after the Trust House 40 days?
Well, Pasta Mania, I don't know if you remember that.
No.
You're probably too young. But it was sort of, you know, a mid-market, casual dining. They opened loads of them. The sauces were made all centrally. And, you know, basically you just opened the sauces and poured them over pasta, cooked pasta, and that was Pasta Mania, and they opened lots of them very quickly. I went and got a job from Trust House 40. I was a marketing manager at Grosvenor House, which sounds grander than it is. I mean, I was 21 and I was cheap. So that's why I got that job. And I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the team, and I learnt a lot. But it sounds, I was probably more like a marketing assistant. And, you know, I'd done all my operational training apprenticeship with Trust House Forte. So I had worked through, I did a year in the kitchens, I did 6 months behind the bar, I did 6 months in a restaurant, I did finance, accounts, I did front office, I did every department over a 3-4 year period. And then I went and worked at Trust House Forte's central office in Slough in their marketing department.
Lovely.
As a sort of as a trainee.
Yeah.
And then from there I was lucky enough to get the job at Grosvenor House.
Yeah.
But I always sort of knew it was because I wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And so Pastamania was one of those places. And then the other place I worked I was night manager at Maxwell's in Covent Garden.
Oh, yeah.
And that was brilliant because it was a super busy restaurant. I only worked nights. I had to count the cash every night before going home. No credit cards in those days. Yeah. It was where the Opera House is now. It's now demolished. Maxwell's has moved. And it taught me a great deal.
Yeah.
And how to run a really busy restaurant, even though I was only the night manager. And then I was able to, during the day, work on my plans for my own restaurant.
And then just, pulling at that thread then. So Brent talks about entrepreneurs have something to prove. They have a chip on their shoulder a little bit, and they have a slight obsession, about something. Is that what started those thoughts about having your own thing? When did that start?
Well, I like Brent very much, and I agree with Brent on lots of things. I don't know. I probably do have a chip on my shoulder, but I don't think that's what led me into starting my own restaurant. I just felt there was an opportunity, and it sort of goes back to what I really loved, which was a room full of people having a good time. That was my obsession. And all through my childhood, I'd work at the local sports club behind the bar. I would sit around when my mum and dad had people round for supper and see how they did it. I loved people having a good time. I loved conversation. Even though I was a very shy kid, I loved watching it, and I loved the interaction of what food, drink, and an atmosphere of a place can do to people's lives. And I think that's what drove me into opening my own place. And I just thought, and we've got to think this was back a long time, over 40 years ago. We were in a country where Britain was not, it's brilliant now, Britain at hospitality. But 40 years ago, we still didn't have, we had pubs and we had restaurants, and you couldn't really eat anywhere in the afternoon. You couldn't really have a drink anywhere after 11 p.m. You couldn't have breakfast anywhere. And in the last 40 years, somehow we've been able to join that all together. And, the creation of so many great places, and also a lot of talent has come into hospitality, which has made, I think, life for people who live in Britain and people who visit Britain much better.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. I was doing a podcast with a professor the other day, Professor Peter Jones, and he had said that what we need to do, exactly as you're saying, is the people who are enjoying those great times is actually to try and persuade them to want to be the makers of those great times as well, and how could we flip customers to say you could serve other people too and actually pass it on to them. So there could be quite a niche in there, to get people into hospitality that way.
I talk a lot saying about the fact that hospitality is just, I look at it myself and I think, well, I was a very shy kid. I was pretty useless at school. I, didn't really get many exams. My A-level, I got an E in economics. I was severely dyslexic. I lacked confidence. But this hospitality and the sort of belief that I could, I was going into an industry which 40 years ago seemed less competitive than it is now. And I really wanted to learn it I wanted to learn every part of it. And I really recommend everyone, there's no fast route. I think you need to just be patient and learn it, because if you learn it properly at the beginning, then you really benefit later on. And I remember, I went I was from a comfortable middle class family. You know, I was one of those very few people who were privileged enough to go to a private school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I came from a comfortable-ish nest.
Mm-hmm.
And my first job on my apprentice scheme with Trust House Forte was the kitchens of St George's Hotel in Langham Place.
Mm-hmm, I know.
And, you know, I went in there and I was surrounded by quite brilliant people, but there were people who came from very different backgrounds from me, different countries, different continents.
Yeah.
And I think that really pulled the shyness out of me.
Yeah.
And it taught me so much.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the team feeling that you have in hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just in those kitchens in those early days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I became good friends of theirs. I used to go out with them in the evenings. And, you know, it really developed me as a person to get on with people. Because I think if you can get on with people, then that is such a magical ingredient for the rest of your lives.
Yeah.
And I think getting on with people, which you can't really learn on a laptop, but you can in real time and real life,
Mm-hmm.
and learning to get on with people, plus learning these great skills which you have forever.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't stay in hospitality, you can always make a cocktail or make a bed or clear a table full of plates, or, you know, whatever, change a light bulb. You know, it just teaches you everything.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of great things there. I think that's always advice I've had, which is, and in fact, you might be able to pass that on to the Scottish members of your family. There's a phrase called, you'll get a jilly piece at any door, which means that you're just a good person and you've got the gift of the gab, and, you know, if you're hungry, someone will sort you out, sort of thing. So I've always thought that there's an EQ, IQ imbalance slightly, where I think having the EQ actually can get you so much further than having the IQ, you know. And if you can frame it and get on with people and, you know, and empathise with people and understand where they're coming from and things like that, I think that's something that hospitality definitely teaches you as well, because you've got difficult customers, you've got difficult workmates, you've got great ones and all the rest of it. And also, if you can turn your hand to an amazing Sunday roast like you do with your chicken, you know, and pass those tips on.
Thank you for that, Mark.
Oh, God, it's incredible.
Thank you.
I've tried many times and failed to make that. But, you know, in terms of that, I think it can get you so far. But in terms of, you know, hospitality in general, and from that middle class background, was it a disappointment that you were going into that? Was there a path laid out for you by your parents, or what was the thoughts?
Well, my dad ran and owned a small insurance broking company,
Mm-hmm.
which both my brothers had gone into,
Mm-hmm.
and the door was open to go into that. But, and this is no disrespect to insurance and no disrespect to any member of my family, but it wasn't that interesting. You know, it just didn't tittle me. And I thought, well, that's what they've done. And, you know, my brothers were better at school than I were. They were better sports people. They had, you know, they had girlfriends, and I struggled with girlfriends. and so I think in it, and this is probably where the entrepreneurship sort of comes out a bit, is there was a point to prove, and I wanted to do something different.
Yeah. And then at that time as well, then, you know, you've went to Pasta Mania. I'm always curious about anything with mania at the end of it, you know, Sushi Mania.
Should be.
Yeah.
You should be.
I'm always a bit like, we might not eat there tonight, darling. So in terms of you then starting, you know, your own restaurant, I mean, where do you even begin? Because there's capital, there's planning, there's staff, there's equipment, there's, you know, all that stuff.
Well, you know, I did I was determined to give it a go, and I look back and I was too young, and I should have waited, and I should have learned a bit more. But family and friends, I raised the money, bank loan, and I opened the first restaurant. And I thought I knew, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And I got a restaurant site in Fulham Broadway. I paid a premium. I think they'd give it to anyone nowadays. It was such a bad site. And I got some designers who, I wasn't confident in design myself then, so the design wasn't great.
Mm-hmm.
The food and the liquor, the drink, the food was not good. The service was a bit shambolic.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all down to me, no
Mm-hmm.
one else. And it wasn't a great experience for anyone who went to eat there.
Yeah.
And it really taught me very, very quickly two things. A, the customer is the smartest person in the world. They suss it out so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They suss out good, bad, indifferent so quickly.
Yeah.
And secondly, it taught me how to survive,
Mm-hmm.
and how the fact that just because I got it wrong this time didn't mean that I was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
It just meant that I was on a journey and I needed to change,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't frightened of changing.
Yeah. Well, I think chalking up those failures is one of the fastest ways to learn, but also you should semi-celebrate it in a way, right? Because it's going to make the next version of you better and closer and hungrier. I always think it's a great thing, when you see those. Because if you've just coasted through and everything's a win, like a lot of the, sound like an old guy, but a lot of the generations coming through, no one's getting the winners' medals and all that stuff. They don't really know when they've got punched in the face, So that I think that's a really great thing to look at. And then this was over the top, right? So this was the Jacket Potato and Toppings restaurant.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing a bit of research. But yes, it was basically you could order a steak, a bit of chicken, a bit of lamb, and a burger,
Yeah.
and a jacket potato. And over the top of it,
Yeah.
there were 10 toppings you could choose
Yeah.
and put on it. And each of the toppings weren't very good, and it was just not a good concept.
Yeah.
And I hate that word concept anyway.
Yeah.
But it was a concept,
Yeah.
and it just didn't work.
Yeah. And then when did you call it quits? How did the end sort of come? Did you just shutter it one day, or what happened?
Well, it wasn't just one. We had a couple.
Uh-huh.
I had a couple over the tops. I started with the restaurant when it's something that has taught me that as soon as sales drop, what usually happens, you start cutting costs. So you then end up reducing the opening hours, or you reduce the amount of people working there. You do all sorts of things, which just makes it worse for the customer, not better.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn makes the sales go down, and you lose more money than save money that you're trying to save.
Yeah.
So that is a big lesson.
Yeah.
And I did all that, so the sales went even further down. And I then did a delivery service because I thought, and I called it Square Meals.
Oh.
And I went out and got a moped on HP, and I did a leaflet drop at Fulham Broadway Tube Station every morning, early in the morning. And then the phones would ring. I'd have 7 videos and a small menu, and then the idea was people would choose, something from the menu and a video, and I would deliver it to them.
Oh, so you were like a Blockbuster type thing as well?
Well, or it was an early Netflix, early delivery, but I think I did about 10 deliveries before that collapsed. But I just learning all along. That what should be right, and I was lucky enough to have enough money to turn one of the over the tops, one in Soho, into Cafe Bohème. So it's the same company. We never went bust, and the banks were knocking on the door and saying, "You owe me a lot of money." My shareholders, which weren't all friends and families, were outside shareholders, were getting more and more impatient, and we turned it once more into Cafe Bohème, and I'm lucky to say that Cafe Bohème is still there 30 years later, and it's what then created, it's the same company, created the rest of the company.
Amazing. And then Cafe Bohème, sort of skipping through that slightly, just so we can get into Soho House and all that great stuff. So with that, I guess you were sort of learning from your experience before how to do it right. It was a different clientele, right, than Fulham Broadway. So there was a lot more kind of artists and creatives and things like that coming in.
Yeah. So I mean, Soho was full of, you know, it was in early 90s. Soho was busy.
Yeah.
The over the top was never busy. Customer very clever.
Yeah.
Tried it, didn't go back. Didn't told everyone it was rubbish. Don't go there. And I kept examining why people wouldn't come to over the top, and I had enough nous to realise that it just frankly wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And basically with Cafe Bohème, I did everything different. You know, I think the design is great. It's the same design now. We opened at 8 a.m. and we closed at 3 a.m, and it was like a chameleon style restaurant which just went on and on and on and changed with what people wanted and felt like. So if people just wanted a cup of coffee or a jug of beer or a plate of frites, they could have that. There was no contingent, you have to have a knife and fork supper. And by having that attitude, it created atmosphere, and then people would eat.
Yeah.
And luckily it was pretty busy from the moment we opened until the moment we closed every day, and put jazz in the afternoon. Everything was what the customer wanted, and if a customer wanted it, we would do it, and the customer would reward you generously because they would keep coming back.
Yeah. And obviously a big design shift as well, right? So from over the top to that, you know, looking a lot more Soho Housey.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? Was that
Well,
you
my
researching?
mum helped me, and I just did everything different from what I did at Over the Top. So old floorboards, church chairs, church pews. You know, I really wanted to make it feel very bohemian.
Yeah.
I wanted to make it feel not perfect. I wanted it to make it feel just full of atmosphere with no one in it.
Yeah.
And I think Cafe Bohème is really the basis of everything I learned at Cafe Bohème is I put into Soho House.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about the first Soho House then? What happened there? Because that feels like a big jump to a private members club.
Well, it was no plan and no dream. It was just a phone call from my landlord, John James, who said, the building above you, we own the whole building, they own the whole building, Soho Estates, Paul Raymond, John James' son-in-law, phoned me and said, I allot to him, it said, you know, the building's come above is available, do you want to have a look at it? So I went and had a look at it, went to see Paul Raymond, and at that point I went to my shareholders and investors. They said, absolutely no way, Nick, you're just concentrating on Cafe Bohème. But Paul Raymond, and he told me he wasn't going to invest any money in it, so I had to go and tell him that I couldn't do it. And it had a small door, and so it was 3 houses in Soho. Soho House was the obvious name. I had this sort of idea that it had to be a private members club, even though I'd never been to one. I felt that's what it had to be. And just as I was leaving his apartment, he called me back and he said, well, what happens if I put the money in for the refurb, but then I charge it onto your rent and you just have to pay that for the period of the lease?
Yeah.
And I went, okay. And that's how Soho House, 40 Greek Street, first opened.
Fantastic. And then you've just opened in Brighton of late, and then Manchester coming.
Yes, indeed.
And then any others in the pipeline you can talk about, or not
Well,
so much?
yes. I mean, we're talking about Glasgow. There's plenty more this year coming. We got Sao Paulo and Mexico happening this year. Portland happening this year. So we've already opened Bangkok.
Amazing.
Which is doing good. So yeah, there's plenty opening.
Nice. And then I was just thinking about business diversity, and the Soho House sort of vision and mission and all that. So you do talk a lot, and you've said it already, in terms of wanting a room that's full of people just having a good time. So in terms of the sort of the vision that holds all this together, because you've got foundation things going on, which are excellent. Love to talk about those. You've got the houses. You've got the houses in cities with no house. You know, and Soho Home on, you know, on the internet, for example. All these things, like, how do you manage to keep all these things together and on brand? Because it's so on brand. You know, everything you do, you can tell it's from you. So where does that come from?
Well, being a bit of a twat, you know, being on it all the time. I mean, I there's a certain feel and look that we want, and you know, the house foundations is very important to me because, you know, I really do feel we are a platform where we want people to flourish, and it doesn't matter where they come from, what background they come from, and everyone's got a right to a future. Everyone has a right to getting into the creative industries, and we got these fantastic members who really want to help people flourish and progress. So that works really well for us, and we got foundations in lots of different areas, but helping people through apprentice schemes, through the mentoring schemes is something I'm very passionate about. So we're doing a lot of that at this precise moment. And going back to your other point, which was about how do we keep it all, you know, looking and feeling in the right sort of way. You're a brilliant team, and a lot of people have been with the team a long time. We got a brilliant, you know, the person who took over as CEO from me, Andrew, is doing a phenomenal job. He's got great attention to detail, and he's really sort of, you know, he sorted out so many parts of a business I couldn't sort out, for instance, Soho Home. So it's exciting times ahead.
So with the Soho House journey as well, I mean, has there been any times you've been like worried about getting into a new country where it's just not been, you know, adopted that well, or places that hasn't worked that well, or, you know, what's your views on that?
I mean, first of all, every country we go into and every new site I open, I worry.
Yeah.
and I think that keeps us sharp. I think if you sort of suddenly feel, ooh, you know, we can go anywhere and it works.
Yeah.
There have been countries which have taken longer than we expected, and more work needed to be put into it, or we went into countries and we were sort of in our little Soho bubble and thinking that more people might have known about us than they did.
Yeah.
And you know, we're hopefully we're self-aware enough to fix that very quickly and not make that mistake again.
Yeah.
So every new opening we take as much time and effort as the last one. Is exactly the same as when I did 40 Greek Street in the first place. And we start with a fresh piece of paper, we design it differently, every building's different, and we really look at the DNA of a building to start with, the DNA of a city, and then the last 20% of the DNA is our DNA, which we incorporate into the house.
Yeah.
So every house feels very different. But I think if you walked into any house, you would feel that it was part of a Soho House.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an instant look. There's an instant welcome. I mean, Bradley and I were just saying, Bradley's doing some filming with us. It's the best welcome we've ever had for a podcast ever. You know, we just came in and just felt, you know, like members. And then when we came up, it was, you know, help yourself to, you know, the buffet and have a coffee, and, you know, people were coming with instructions to work the desk and just all these things. You just thought, wow, you know. And, you know, when you take on team members, and this is at every level, what are you telling them, you know, or how are you finding them, you know, with that in them? Because it's not easy.
Well, I personally, you know, when I did a lot of this, I would usually be able to tell within 5 minutes. And I think that's how long a customer has, really. I mean, they probably have a bit less than 5 minutes. So it's forget their skill set. You can help them and develop their skill set, but their personality is something, and their can-do attitude, and I think I think hospitality is so important for that. Is you know, it's the clue is in the name. You know, you have to like people, you have to get on with people, and you have to want to make their lives better when they're in the place that you're working at. And I think a lot of the time people get confused that it's, you know, they're working at customs at an airport, and rather than working in a place where you're welcoming people and you're thinking outside the box, and you're not, if they want something which doesn't come in with the square box of what you say, then, you know, look left and right, and if it's legal and possible, make it happen.
No, I think you're right. I always enjoy in the dictionary, I think the definition of hospitality actually says the Scottish hospitality is very good, so I always get off on that. But no, I think it is just hiring for attitude, and we are finding that more and more with Hospitality Rising that you've very kindly invested in, and we can talk about that as well. But, you know, in terms of that, we're really seeing that the millennial and centennial or Gen Z generation, they really don't want to be screened in the same way or judged in the same way as people were before. So I think we're going to have to actually blow up the application process and how people actually come in, you know, and how they're received. And I saw a chef the other week going crazy because someone had sent him an email and it was just a blank email, but the title just said, "Do you have any jobs going?" ? And this chef was going nuts because this person hasn't attached the CV in it. And I was like, you're thinking about this wrong. This person has shown some initiative. It is how the kids sort of message each other these days. Actually, they could be a great hire.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'm not one for looking at a CV. I mean, anyone can write anything on a CV. You know, it's is it worth the paper it's written on? I don't know. You know, but meet the person, and if they got the confidence, whatever they ask you, you know, have you got any jobs going? I'll go, well, yes. yes, we have. Get on the phone, get on a Zoom, come in and see us, and within 5 minutes, you have this dialogue, and you can, I think, work out whether they're gonna really flourish and enjoy themselves within the business.
No, definitely. And also, it doesn't need to be the most extroverted a person. You know, there's just that willingness to help other people, I think, is the key.
Absolutely. And then, you can be as like shy guy like me, you know, or you could be very unconfident. You know, it doesn't matter. Give it a go, because you might find this as the bit which unlocks the inner side of you to great things.
Definitely. So just sticking on the staff thing then, I mean, obviously we're wanting to talk about that today. So how are you finding things at Soho House, getting staff at the moment? You know, how's that working for you?
Well, coming out of the pandemic over a year ago was really difficult. And, you know, and I'm really sympathetic to everyone in hospitality. You know, there was you know, people didn't want to work like they used to. You know, hospitality, and I say, whenever I do a breakfast every Wednesday with new people who've started with us, or people who've been with us for a while, I go, you know, it isn't easy. You know, when we're not offering a cotton wool existence in hospitality, but, you know, there is a degree of robustness you need. You know, it is. You can be on your feet for a long period of time. You can. It's quite physical in its nature, but it's incredibly rewarding. And just getting to know all your colleagues and working as a team, and it is so. I mean, I sound that every time I talk about, you know, the people in hospitality, I'm always trying to pitch to a load of people to join, and I am, because I'm just so lucky I found it. But going back to your question, which was how are we finding it now, it was really difficult. And because we used to do a lot of recruiting directly from Europe into our restaurants, and now obviously with Brexit we can't do that. And I do hope government figure out a way on trying to make you know, not just skilled people to get jobs in this country, but to let other people come in and work here.
Yeah.
Because we need that. Britain has always needed that.
Yeah.
And I also hope that there's a lot of people who are out there who are thinking of what to do. Give it a go, even if it's just for a year or 2 years, because you'll have skills that you can always use. And I can always tell people who have done a year in hospitality.
Yeah.
You just see it, how they just pick up some glasses or talk to you, or you see them talking to someone else. They have a way about them which you can't learn at any higher education, I don't think. I think you can learn it in hospitality or get hospitality jobs in your holidays, etc. But going back to how it is now, it is getting easier. People are we're not looking for nearly as many people as we were looking for. We work very hard on retaining people and trying to look after them, and trying to look after them while they're with us, and also making sure they develop within the company. And if they want to progress, we're a great company for people to progress in. So it's getting better, but it's not perfect.
Yeah, and also for a while, you were really sort of in the forefront of a lot of the hiring, where you were doing the flexible hiring. So flex, and a lot of people were really talking about it. Everyone was going, "Wow, have you seen this? Oh my God, that's unbelievable." Is that something that worked well?
Yeah, it did work well. I think at times it sort of made some of our managers not focus on recruiting full-time people and looking after full-time people, because they had a prop in the fact that if people didn't turn up, there was always flex.
Yep.
So I think flex is really important, but not as the last resort. The last resort, the first resort's got to be making sure you have a really good permanent team.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you made as well. I remember talking to Kate Nichols at UKH about this, and it was something we were considering for the Hospitality Rising advertising, which was, and we might still in the future, but working in hospitality makes you a better everything. So it actually makes you a better father, mother, friend, as you're saying, just the clearing up thing, and there almost seems to be a secret Masonic handshake a little bit between people that have been in hospitality, in a way where, I've been to a lot of restaurants where you chat to the staff, or you maybe tip them, and they're a bit like, "Do you work in hospitality?" And you're like, "Yeah." It's just something as you say.
It's an appreciation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's not always easy.
Yeah.
And I'm really clear about that. This is not always easy. This is not, but it's so rewarding.
Yeah, it's so enjoyable, but I guess you need to be wired that way. So just thinking about Hospitality Rising then, so that's how we first met. So very kindly you got me down to Brighton Beach House when it was just in its finishing stages. So we're stepping over some wires and things like that. And then we had a chat about Hospitality Rising, and I think what impressed me so much, and just to blow some smoke for a bit, was the best investors we've had in the Hospitality Rising have said, "Yes, we'll invest. That's fine." But the killer question or killer sort of compliment is, "What else can we do for you?" And that was the big thing. And the best investors that we have in Hospitality Rising have been the ones that have said, "What more can we do? Of course we'll invest, but." So just to tell you, I was telling you just off mic there, but just to repeat it, so we've been doing really well, which is great news, and as an investor it's good to tell you these things. So we've had almost 100,000 applications. We've got 49% recall of the campaign in 24 weeks, so that's not too shabby, I don't think. We raised almost £1 million, from a sheet with an idea. But the big one is that consideration looks to have moved from 1 in 5 people considering working in hospitality to 1 in 3. So I didn't even expect the needle to move at all, because a lot of people with consideration, it takes so long to go up and so long to come down. So I didn't think it would have moved at all. But I mean, are you surprised by those stats?
Well, I'd like to blow a bit of smoke, and Mark, I think what you've done is phenomenal. I know that you put way beyond what you talk about into this, and raising £1 million out of hard up hospitality companies is no mean feat, and 100,000 applications which wouldn't have come without you and your drive is incredible. And I think the conversion, i.e. the figures you just said, is hugely impressive. And I think I just really encourage anyone who might be listening to this to really help Mark and what he's doing with Hospitality Rising, because I think it's something we will continue supporting at Soho House. And I just think we all have a personal, if you're in hospitality, we all have a personal sort of but a personal thing that we have to try and encourage more people to get into hospitality, not just because it will help our businesses, but also it will help them as people.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying before, a lot of people then won't trade 2 or 3 days, but as you say, it's worse for the customer.
Yeah.
And yes, you might be saving, but in the long term, and I think there's a great phrase, I've had a mentor all my life called Robert Bean, and Robert always used to say, and still does, he's still alive. So he used to say, you can't shrink a business to greatness.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that we're trying to get across to people, is saying, look, yes, we'll help the short term, we will help you get applications in, that's fine, but there's lots of companies doing that. But the bit that will change is that longer term consideration. And can you imagine at that careers officer stage or in schools or whatever it is, where we can actually talk to people, and we're one of the top 5 things that people want to go into. I mean, even if we got to top 5, doctors, lawyers, insurance company, whatever it is, finance.
And absolutely. And I know, kids when they're coming out of school go, well, shall I go to university? What degree shall I do? Yeah. Or shall I get an apprenticeship in hospitality, or just go and work my job around in different jobs in hospitality? Yeah. I'm not saying you shouldn't do the university route, but you will learn an incredible amount about life and not end up with a debt at the end of it.
Yeah.
And you would have found yourself a career which you will enjoy for a long time.
Yeah, well, I remember I did a podcast with Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy a little while ago, and he's a kind of behavioural scientist, behavioural expert, and he was saying 2 things. So one, and I think we could do this as companies, but also as Hospitality Rising, get people to apply in groups. So thinking back to, when I worked on Our Price Records on a Saturday and all the rest of it, it's a lot less intimidating to, if a group of you apply to go and work somewhere. Yeah. So I think that's something we still need to do. And then the second thing is, he was actually going to write a piece for one of the magazines he writes for, I think it's maybe Spectator, and he was going to talk about lobbying the government to say, if you work in industry, specifically hospitality, for 2 years after school, that then you would get your uni or college paid for, or in some way.
Yeah.
And actually, so many people just would then stay, because it's such a alluring place to be, that if they just tried it, actually, they would love it. Yeah. And they would stay. So I think there's a lot in that as well to be said for that,
Well, I think there's a lot government can do to help.
Yeah.
And I think tourism and hospitality in the UK is an industry that we all should be proud of.
Yeah.
And I think there should be more help, and to encourage people to come in homegrown. I mean, if you go to France, part of the educational syllable is hotel management.
Yeah.
You go to a hotel management class when you're 13 or 14. It's putting it into the mainstream education. And I'm not saying we should do that, but I think there should be more done about encouraging people to get into hospitality.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing that we want to do. So we just had a strategy session for Hospitality Rising for the next year, what we're going to do. So I think, and we get a lot of calls for, what about the 55-year-olds, and what about this and what about that, and that's fine, but I think we should be focused, and I think Hospitality Rising should be about the future of, and as you're saying, wouldn't it be great if, because it's all our thing now, we're all getting a bit grey-haired and whatever, so hospitality is ours to be the bastions of, that we want to pass it on to be a better place than when we joined, right? So I think when getting into schools is making me really excited. So getting into schools and also colleges and unis, but doing it in a great way. So at the moment, obviously, hats off to everyone that goes into schools and all that at the moment. But I'd love there to be almost a more coordinated way that we do it, you know, that's interactive and exciting. And wouldn't it be great if we could manage to get some help like we did for Hospitality Rising, where we work with the best learning consultants out there that do things for Lego and Nike and all these people and TikTok and whatever, and we actually go into schools with that hat on rather than two cassette banners, a chef with a frying pan and a cocktail shaker. You know, wouldn't it be amazing if we could actually leapfrog what the other industries are trying to do, you know, to get people in.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
You know, any way of getting into people's minds that hospitality is a good industry to get into. And going back to what you originally said about the over 55, well, if everyone had a little taste of hospitality at a younger age, then when you're 55 and you're needing to go back into hospitality, then that's going to help you a lot as well.
Yeah.
And I encourage anyone who's 55 to apply to get into hospitality. Definitely. Because I think, you know, it's an industry for everyone.
Definitely. And you know what's interesting? There's a great Dalai Lama quote that says, if we taught every child at school now to meditate, in 2 generations' time there'll be no wars. And it's a little bit like that. I mean, not that I'm comparing it exactly, but it's a little bit like that. If we trained everyone in hospitality and to appreciate it, and you know, then you know we would fill that funnel longer term. You know, so I think that's definitely where we're going to focus and what's going to happen. So I'm just conscious of your time too, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But in terms of then thinking about persuading an 18 to 24-year-old to join, so I remember from your chat with Tom Hetherington up in Manchester, you said some brilliant things, which was you were always just looking at what your kids were into and their friends to give you an idea and keep you tapped in. So again, thinking about that, you know, how would you persuade someone that's on that precipice of 4 or 5 things to actually get into hospitality? What would you be saying to them?
Well, a lot of what I've already said, which is, you know, what it does to your personality and your ability to get on with people, and you're not making a life decision here to give it a go.
Yeah.
You're not losing out on anything.
You don't have to get married.
You don't. Yeah, you're not. You give it a go for 3 months.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out, maybe it doesn't work out. But I would give I only talk from the amount of people who I've seen flourish in hospitality and what it's done to me as a person. And you know, you can be an entrepreneur within hospitality much easier, I think, than necessarily being an entrepreneur in other industries. You can open your own little bar. You know, I mean, sure, there's you need finance and you need you know, an element of luck to be able to do that. But if you're determined, you will find that.
Yeah.
And I just think you really are widening. If you're between 18 and 24 and you're figuring out what to do, you're really widening your options now and later on if you give hospitality a go.
And I think also it's a lot about saying yes, isn't it? So yes, I'll go and work in the kitchen. Yes, I'll do the coffees. Yes, I'll do front of house. Yes, I'll look at the text. Yes, I'll take photographs for social media, and just putting yourself about.
And I think people tend to be a bit, you know, when I was 17 and really figuring out going into hospitality, I didn't look at hospitality down the end of my nose and think, well, I'm slightly better than that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we still suffer from that in hospitality a bit, where people feel, well, I'm there to be served, not to serve.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's such a wrong way of looking at it. And I think, you know, everyone should serve everyone, and everyone should be served by people.
Yeah.
And I think it's just something that shouldn't be a reason not to give it a go.
Yeah. And then just in terms of the promotion of it, I was really tickled by Fred's Last Resort. Did you hear about this on Channel 4? So Fred Sirieix, you know.
Oh, yes,
Fred?
yes.
So, funnily enough, as I was getting on the train, one of the contestants from it walked past me. a lady called Heather.
You've had quite a day today, haven't you? First day out of Brighton since November, and one of Fred's contestants walking past you.
I was going to run for a selfie, but yeah, I never managed to catch her. But I think there's something around that. Although TV scene is old school and whatever, I think there's a lot of television potential for food programs have never been hotter in that sense. But I think, a Netflix show with like Ed Gamble and James A. Caster doing their thing, or, and also we've got no shortage of great venues, great food, great people. I'm really excited about that kind of content creation as well to get the message out.
Well, there's some great podcasts out there, isn't there? And I think food. I mean, it's food and talking about food. I mean, as a family, we talk too much about food. we're always 2 meals ahead, figuring out what we're having and how it's going to be cooked and whatever. And I just think it's such a passion, and it's something you do at least 3 times a day. Yeah. And you should just really get into the whole food thing.
Yeah, definitely. And then, did you learn any good tricks when you were in the kitchen back then? That you've carried with you for life?
Well, I can turn a potato, a carrot.
Yeah.
I can chop an onion quite quickly. I know how to fry things and stir them with my hand. Yeah, lots of things. And I love cooking. It taught me to love cooking as well.
And it taught you to dodge a frying pan from an angry chef?
Yes, and I had a few of them and a few other things. But that was all part of it.
Yeah.
And I, even, in those days, it was very robust in a kitchen, but it wasn't meant with malice. It was meant by, and I know things have rightly changed and it's better now, but it again, just taught you a lot as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, last couple of things then. So I was just going to ask you, I mean, there's so much we could have went on for days with all the questions I sent through to you, but just some fun stuff then in a wee second. But just before we do that, what's next for you and what's next for Soho House? What's going on there?
Well, I'm founder. I love the business dearly. I'm there to really help Andrew and his management team grow Soho House and make life for our members better. I wake up every day and go, how can our members flourish professionally and how can they flourish socially? And can I create that room full of people which make that happen?
Yeah.
So we'll just do more of that, and I love it.
Great. Cool. Okay, and then next couple of openings, so Manchester, Glasgow. Is Africa ever on the cards?
I'd love Africa. We're looking like mad to open in a number of countries in Africa.
Yeah. That'll be exciting. We'll keep looking at that. In Glasgow, I can't wait for. There's a lot of people very interested about Glasgow. So yeah, I'll be your little champion for that as well and try and get you some memberships. Okay, last couple of questions, fun stuff. So, favourite city to eat in?
Ooh, well, I think Paris.
Yeah.
I'm old school. I love Paris.
Yep.
I think Paris is on the up again.
Mm-hmm.
I think their food scenes sort of skipped a generation or two.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Paris.
Great. Favourite hotel?
Well, I'm going to say the Hotel de Cap in south of France.
Uh-huh.
Luckily, occasionally, I've been able to stay there. And it's just old school glamour. And the staff are always the same.
Great. Any celeb spotting when you're there?
There's the odd one, but we don't talk about it.
Not Fred's latest contestant on his last resort. You got a favourite coffee shop?
I'm going to go Blake's.
Uh-huh.
In it's in a village just near us. I live in Bampton in Oxfordshire, and they bake their own bread.
Lovely.
In fact, we have an outpost of it of a farm, Soho Farmhouse, and yeah, they do great coffee. They make great sourdough, and their buns are fantastic.
Nice. That's a quote.
Yeah.
And then favourite bar or pub?
Well, I'm going to stay local again.
Yeah.
The Bell near me is fantastic, run by Pete and Tom.
Mm-hmm.
and I was there on Friday for a family dinner. The food's great, the beer's great, and they're just brilliant people who run a great pub.
Nice. Favourite drink?
Pint of bitter, glass of red wine.
Okay. Any particular kinds?
Well, I like going local on the bitter.
Oh, yeah.
So, because I live in Oxfordshire, I have Hooky.
Oh, yeah.
And red wine, I like a Bordeaux.
Okay. Nice. And then last one, favourite restaurant?
Well, I'm going to say River Cafe.
Yes.
And it's a sort of family institution to us at the Joneses. My kids have worked there. Kirsty and I have eaten there ever since we've known each other. Our girls ate there when in high chairs.
Yep.
And we go there regularly. As a treat, but as something we love, and the food is always fantastic. The service is fantastic, and they just do such a brilliant job down there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's people. It's probably the most consistent one that people have said is their absolute favourite. Yeah, definitely, it does so well. You got a favourite dish there?
Well, weirdly, I love the pigeon. Because I sort of always go for dishes which I can't really cook at home. And they do this great pigeon dish. Or, all their pasta dishes are fantastic. Yeah. And as a family, we're sort of greedy enough to have a pasta course.
Okay, yeah.
Which is sandwiched between the main and the starter. But it's always fantastic.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, well, love you and leave you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. And, if anyone's listening, just encourage people to get into hospitality.
Definitely. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.